Okay, welcome to our latest in series of interviews on the buyer with key people from the drinks industry, and very welcome to Troy Christensen, who's the MD of Enotria & Co. How are you, sir?
Why, thank you for the introduction and the time to talk. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, sir. Not bad. Yeah, well, we're kind of in the same boat to some extent because obviously the buyer is aimed at the premium on-trade, and your business is rather similar. So we're sharing the same issues, I think, but well, perhaps not quite as intense at your end. So how are things for you?
Well, yeah, it's been a challenge. So we have about 90% of our contributions in the on-trade. So it is difficult. When the government started locking things down, we sent everyone to work from home. And then when ultimately they shut down the on-trade, we furloughed about 85% of our people. We do have an off-trade team. We do some business in the off-trade, and they've been busy. We had invested originally, we had sort of seen a little bit of the digital and the Deliveroo model working a little bit, the casual dining suffering. So we had proposed, and we internally announced a couple of digital initiatives to grow that channel a little bit, but we just weren't quite ready. We had quite a lot of pressure and some seismic growth when it all hit us here. So we do have a bit of a skeleton staff working on the digital side and the off-trade side, but obviously even with growth there, it doesn't offset the substantial portion of the on-trade that we're missing.
Yeah, so when you say digital, you mean supplying people who are like online players, or do you mean digital as in you doing e-commerce yourselves?
Yeah, so we have a platform called Great Western Wine, and so Great Western Wine is a retail outlet.
Yeah.
It's going to be rebranded pretty soon. I'm not going to get ahead of our communications, but yeah, and so we've seen substantial growth there. So we saw 300-400% growth in the immediate weeks after the pandemic was announced. Yeah. Sadly, our parcel carrier, because what we did is we shut down most of our operations in fleet. We do have our own drivers. We're a bit unique in the premium wine that we do have our own, we sort of control the last mile, so we can provide our customers with sort of good customer service. It's just impossible to do that if you just have small independents around. So we were doing it through our parcel carrier. Okay. And just by the volume of things that started going through the parcel carriers, they just choked on it. So it took weeks. They lost everything. Our poor customer service people had daily calls on where my order is, and you just couldn't find it, and they just choked. So we unfortunately had to switch parcel carriers in the middle of it. But what we also did is we turned on our drivers. So in a number of the key areas, we turned on our drivers. So actually they're delivering to the independents, giving them a better service. And then we're filling the rest of the van up with just personal drops to consumers from Great Western Wine. And then we started promoting, because we had a lot of products out there that just, were for the on-trade, but quite frankly, they're date driven. So all the beers,
of course,
I was going to go and drinking beers. So we actually on the website started posting a lot of our beers, and there was just this weird consumer takeaway because only one person can shop. You got to stand in a queue for a grocery store. People were panicked to get in there, and if you're going to be dragging stuff out, the last thing you want to drag out is a big slab of beer. So literally in the 2 months after the shutdown, 5 of my top 10 SKUs were beers in the Great Western Wine Company. We didn't even have a beer tab. We just had a little tab in other, and somehow people were just searching for beer. And it was helpful for us because, we could fill up the trucks and it helped us monetize some inventory. So, so that's the digital platform. Well, we had partnered with a couple of people, and I think what's interesting is you're seeing a bunch of people that were B2B businesses selling food, veg, meat. And now what do? So a whole bunch of folks start migrating to Shopify websites or coming up with a B2C component of their model.
Yeah.
We had engaged a number of them actually before, and we've seen these guys go through hyper growth, 300 to 500% growth during this period. And so what we did is started going out and talking to the people that were just doing this. We actually partnered with a group that does alcohol licensing, and we started offering to help contribute and support these folks in driving some licensing. So there's a fruit and veg guy that sells boxes of fruit and veg, and now he's selling some wine with it as well, and a bottle of Pinot Grigio Prosecco. And we're doing 10, 20 cases a week for each of these different players that are up. That isn't going to make up for Aintree or Wimbledon, but I think this is a bit of the future. And if you can find your way into this channel, and so what we've done is we automated the back end so that all these Shopify sites and people are using the same kinds of tools. It just flips into our back office, and then we can just fulfill it like was a normal order.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the sort of the one uplifting thing about the whole COVID situation, which is, and there aren't many, but that speed in which businesses have been able to adapt. Because I imagine that kind of thing normally for you would take months rather than matter of a few weeks that you've been talking about. Yeah,
and it's a mindset too, because everything on B2B is different than the B2C on the supply chain. So you're dealing with a restaurateur. It might be an obstreperous one, and they might give it to you if you don't have the right service, or you miss something, or you're off by an hour, you have the wrong price. But there's a level of professionalism that's expected. The anonymity of consumers on a B2C website, if you don't get that slab of Peroni tomorrow, he's got 20 different posts on your social media slagging you off. And so we were responding at a very different level. The way that package has to show up, the importance of, the gift messaging. There was lots of gift messages, people sending little, perking people's feelings up by, sending a bottle of wine one way or the other with a, heartfelt gift message. And, to an operation whose job previously was cost efficiencies of getting a whole bunch of product out the door, migrating it into each is an individual, and it shows up in that commercial presence and view of it has to look a little bit differently. Yeah, it was a big mindset shift. So it was baptism by fire, but I think we've made some progress during this period.
And has that been a case of also making sure you got the right people in the business to do that at the moment? Because I suppose you have that dilemma of who do you furlough, who do you have on, who do you have working, I suppose? And
yeah, well, so it's very hard. So our digital team and the retail team that does the digital are all still working, obviously, but the operations and the team, everybody, we had a pretty skinny staff going, and the problem a little bit with the furlough rules is we had to leave our guys furloughed, and we'd bring a few agency guys in to deal with ups and downs. Okay. But the importance, I guess we were lucky enough that the guys, particularly in the supply chain, that wanted to work with us, the drivers that wanted to engage and come off furlough, were some of our best guys. And so they dealt with the situation quite well.
Evolved, yeah.
Yeah, so and plus I think there's some unique nuances that helped us, right? So our systems weren't quite set up if the person wasn't there. So that return process in a B2C is very different than a B2B, but everybody theoretically is at home. There's very little traffic. So the pandemic on the B2C side was somewhat helpful in clearing the path for people maybe with not the appropriate level of system in place, but a little bit of moxie to find a way to get out there and do a few things.
So you mentioned obviously 90% of the business is on trade. So what have you done with the staff in terms of the furlough ratio? Or what have you managed to do in terms of who you?
Well, so we have an order office team, and they're here, so anybody that's ordering can continue to engage with them. They cover both off, on, digital, and then the off trade team, which we have, is still running. And then the on trade team, we historically had one person for independent specialists, and that's basically all that's operating. The couple of people that fell outside of that, we've just sort of man-marked them with someone from the sales operations team. Okay. Basically, our on trade team, which is the majority of our cost as a business from a payroll standpoint, they're pretty much mostly at home, because all their customers are at home. Yeah. And it's a difficult time for them because, it's a social industry. They're social people. Yeah. They're running around talking to everybody. No one really knows what's going on. There's lots of conversation, but it's hard to sort of formally, engage with them. I write little weekly emails to everybody to try to keep people up to speed. And, now we're sort of on this brink of reemerging. And so trying to understand what that looks like and how to do that. We'll do that through, a more general communication through, Zoom, Teams, whatever, just to get people up and running. But yeah, it's been a challenging time for a lot of folks. And I think it's tough because the people that have been working, they're doing the job of 10, whether they wanted to or not.
Of course.
The people that are home, so the people here are working harder than ever. The people at home are somewhat frustrated that they're not working. They have no control over the situation. They're worried about their jobs. And so then the people at the office are like, I'd rather be at home, not having to worry about waking up. And the people at home are like, I'd rather be working. And it creates this internal conflict that's a bit unnecessary, but it's just sort of the function of the way the furlough system worked. And so we've tried to, do the best to keep people on board, and, whether we've done a good job or bad job. We actually also issued so we use a thing called the happiness index, and they came out with a very specific COVID piece, believe it or not. So we actually have asked everyone how they're doing, what we need to do, how to improve, and so we can get a little bit of feedback. But again, it's the same kind of issues you would expect. Lots of concern about jobs and how things will happen in the future. So, but I think it's helpful because they feel like they've had some input into what you're thinking about in communications.
Yeah, and is it from July the 1st that the new flexi furlough comes into place? Is that going to help in terms of being able to, as and when the on-trade does come back or starts to slowly come back, and I guess we don't know how that's going to work out, but will that help?
Yeah, well, I think it'll help for a lot of people. I mean, sadly, the people that have basically been on furlough have no choice. You can't put them on furlough now. So everybody working so hard, we'll just get some people that will support and help them out. And yeah, so, it's interesting because we've talked to a lot of customers trying to see what's going on so that we can build our forecast, feel like how many people we're going to bring off furlough. And because we have the warehouse and operations as well, trying to understand, what we need to turn on, what we don't need to turn on. And there is a bit of a challenge because there's been very late information coming from Westminster. I mean, as late as yesterday, the decision to open up some streets so that there could be some, seating outside cafe style. And that's what's worked very successfully. If you look at Paris or even Chicago yesterday, where they opened up, again, they had lots of good, buzzy, younger kids usually, but that's what's sort of helped bring people back a little bit in the on-trade. So I think it's good that London's doing that. I just wish actually it would have been a little bit more proactive. And then everybody, the 2 meter, 1 meter rule and all the different specifics, there just hasn't been clarity. And so you have some operators that are just going to go out there and some innovators like Oakman who have gone full board, perplex screens, they're all ready to go and they're going to be one of the leaders in the COVID. People with good outdoor space are fine. A lot of the London folks are not really ambitious. There's so many people in London that are going to work from home for the rest of the year. So so people that are, whose job or outlet basically provides lunch, food, or drinks after work are really going to struggle, I think, in the next 6 months. And so you got a lot of people almost soft launching, dipping their toe in. I would say the regions probably are going to be stronger than London.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean that's actually something which I've heard from different operators as well, who are perhaps, as you say, have that more flexibility, to be able to open up in the regions where perhaps some of the overheads aren't as high as they are in central London as well, which I guess helps to some extent.
Yeah, and I think there's more space too, so outdoor space in a lot of those areas. The hotel, some of the hotels that are in more staycation kind of areas are getting a little busier. And they're getting some bookings. And so, in the areas that have opened already in Europe and some of the States, you did see a very tenuous start. There was very limited feedback of super spreader issues or risks or these kinds of problems, and very limited increase in sort of infections upon opening. And I think that quickly gave people confidence to get back out there. So, places like Florida that have been open for a month or so, I mean, it's almost normal. I don't even talk about it anymore. So hopefully that, kind of momentum comes here.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the thing, that we're all taking sort of baby steps here, aren't we? Because you need the on-trade to sort of like start coming back, and we need the consumers to have the confidence to go there for you to be able to start supplying. So it's all kind of interconnected.
Yeah, but I think the government would be well served to have confidence in the competence of the operators
Yeah.
to be able to effectively provide safety and a good consumer experience, and the consumers with the right risk tolerance to come out and enjoy themselves. And I think that was a bit of the basis that you had in these other areas. Nobody's going to come out and be, reckless. They know that in any survey that you're doing right now, and you see them in CJ and Nielsen, a customer needs to feel like there's some social distancing or some protection. But if that's provided, a good service could be delivered by the outlet. In the States, almost 80% people have really enjoyed their first experience out, so a pretty good number. And, look, it's the people that have less, more risk tolerance, the younger kids or whatever, that are out first. They have a good experience, good time. Other people say, I miss all that. And those guys seem to be doing okay, so they come back out. So I think the UK did a pretty good job of scaring everybody and telling them if they came outside, they were going to hurt the NHS and kill grandma.
Yeah.
So I do think there's got to be almost the same kind of momentum the other way.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? On the retail side, you had people stacked up for Primark on Monday, so maybe you'll do this. You'll see the same thing on the pub side, but I think it'll be a slower burn than in some other areas.
So, in terms of the conversations you're having with the operators, I mean, have you had any kind of clear thought on what kind of drinks ranges? I mean, I know some of the CGA data has shown that there's going to be perhaps some more demand for sort of more focused, smaller drinks lists and also smaller menus. Is that something which you're seeing?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are almost soft launching with a more narrow range around just the key things. So I think you're going to go back a bit to the trusted brands. You're going to go back to the key, listings, the Malbecs and New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs and things, and people probably won't get too experimental. You will see a lot of the outlets start digging into their cellar. People have basically not been operating for a while, so they don't need to replenish for a little bit. So, they'll get rid of what they have. And you've seen a few people doing that online as it is already. So, I don't think this is going to be a big bang. I think it's toe in the water, narrow, and then they're going to build up from there is my general sense. But, from someone that supplies, you're almost seeing this real herky-jerky of, we're going to open, but I got all of this stuff, but I'm out of tequila. So can I get some tequila or orange juice? So it's a real strange situation reopening. It's not the breadth of what you would normally expect. It's going to be a very different, set of requirements for whoever's opening and what they're going to provide.
And does that sort of like, I'm sure the issue for you is having too much drink in your warehouses. But I mean, in terms of your own supply chain, I mean, is that sort of trying to second guess a little bit to make sure you have got the right levels of Sauvignon Blanc or the big hitters that might suddenly be in demand, as opposed to having a long tail of wine that may not be sold for quite a while?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of the issue. I mean, obviously we had a fairly large warehouse of wine. I mean, March, everybody, was sort of ramping up for Easter, et cetera. And so you ended up with a good chunk of wine. We also had already shipped out a bunch of wine to our customers, Aintree and the horse racing, that didn't take place. So all of the events we had already pre-purchased, had the wine, already shipped the wine out, and unfortunately then had to get the wine back. Now it's tax paid. So we have a surplus of wine. Yeah, we sort of knew that was going to happen. So the people that we had on board, particularly in the off trade and a couple of the areas, what we did is package up some of our stranded, we call them long stocks. And we look for opportunities out there to see, because a lot of the digital guys, just weren't prepared for the kind of volume they were getting. And so we did find ways to get rid of a couple million pounds of sort of stuff that I guarantee would be still sitting here by Christmas had we not. Which was very helpful. And so we're not quite down to where we need to be, and we're a bit misshaped. But I do think, to your point, there is not going to be a giant, preload of inventory. There is going to be a very slow and risk-adverse kind of replenishment process.
Yeah. So in terms of the communication back to your suppliers and to the producers, I suppose the most of your producers are facing similar problems in all their main export markets. I mean, what are you doing there?
Well, and because we're on trade, a lot of the suppliers are very on trade dominated, right? So So they don't have the balance. Some of our suppliers that are a little bit more at the entry level will do a lot of off trade, and so they're a little bit ambivalent, quite frankly, because they're continuing to operate. So the on trade guys have been really impacted quite a bit. They are on one side, I think they've been very understanding of the situation because it's happened everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've worked together because we do have long relationships with a lot of them. They want to get the branding. Most of our suppliers are long-term, families that are in it for the long term. So this is a blip. They've had plenty of blips in their, generations of history. So the UK is a little bit later than most people opening, though. So, there's lots of questions and inquiries and kinds of things. We've tried to take the time in the interim to do stuff around engaging. So because we have the digital platform, what we've done is created Instagram live tastings with a lot of
that,
but we've done it with, with a couple of our high profile, the Trim Box, the Foresters, Ken Forrester. So you could buy a 6-pack. You'd get it before the tasting. Ken would sit down and talk about wines and a few other things with Harriet, our head of buying, and then we'd pass on another, promotional, if you wanted to buy some more of that particular product on the back of, and we donated some of the funds from the sales to their charities. So it worked really well. We got a lot of people pretty involved, and being able to tie in actually the digital platform that the people could actually sell and then go buy at any time was pretty helpful. And interestingly, some Ken or Trimbach that have more of a global platform actually, we got some good viewerships from the States and some other areas as well.
You have these online chats, and you think you're focusing it on a UK market, but actually you've got people zooming in from everywhere. So those people who you was that with consumers, or was that with people in the trade who were on furlough who were taking part in those, or a bit of both?
Most of it was trade folks, but we would get some consumers. So again, the people from the States were Ken Forster's distributors or big fans, or people that had traveled and seen Ken, or had been down to the, so it's usually you're not drinking, you're bringing in the fans of the particular people, Planeta, who is a pretty notable character from, Sicily. So, you're sort of dragging the Planeta fans in who maybe enjoy the wine, but have never heard anything from Alessio Planeta talk about the product. And so, so it's always interesting.
Yeah, and I suppose going forward, I mean, we've seen, lots of the independent wine merchants have really benefited from doing a lot of these Zoom tastings. And, I suppose it's, as the on-trade comes back, I guess that potentially is a whole new area for you to work with them in that kind of at-home experience, but with your favorite restaurant, if you see what I mean. They potentially might have that as a new way for them to actually take their restaurant experience, but have it at home.
Yeah, look, and I think, you had sort of a captive audience, right? So a lot of people trying to take advantage of it, but I think just like everywhere, there'll be some innovation around that and how to make it more interesting and engaging. Because now when people can go out, to get them to sit at home and go through a tasting, sometimes, a lot of times, we talk to ourselves too much. So the trade and the kind of conversations are probably a little bit more directed towards people that would be trade interested and probably much more wine knowledgeable than the major consumers. So I think that the challenge we have is how to drag in a bigger base of people that might be very interested in, so we can build the category. Interestingly, though, I think wine, particularly in the on-trade, has struggled over the past couple of years, because the casual dining, the numbers have been pretty negative in comparison to the other categories.
Yeah.
I think wine's had an opportunity. The UK in particular has seen an overall alcohol decline, but wine has done better than most of the other, particularly spirits. In the States, wine saw a pretty big upsurge. So I think, it's just when you're at home and everyone's sitting around.
Yeah.
It's probably there's no sports. It's probably the beverage of choice, as opposed to beer or someone making a complicated cocktail for themselves at home. But, again, it's the opportunity. So despite all of that, let's take the benefit of it and try to build on it to make sure people that we've sort of sucked in during this time into the category still enjoy it in the future.
So, I mean, looking forward, I know you've spoken in the past about potentially overcapacity in the restaurant space, and the kind of the problems that have been in casual dining over the last 18 months or so. I mean, where do you see it happening? I mean, there's been talk of sort of 30%, 30% of restaurants may come back. I mean, what's your feelings around that?
Well, that seems to be a pretty consistent number between here and the States. I think if you see the big casual dining guys, I mean, right now they're all going basically through CVAs or some sort of financial transaction, and they're getting rid of their tail, right? And I do think there is a very difficult conversation between lots of restaurants and their landlords, because you can't, with half the covers, pay those kinds of London rents. And so I think there is a bit of a reset here. It is a one-time reset that you'll see. It will probably provide, you know, a health injection with a lot of the folks that just had this tail of sites that were dragging them down. And if you look at the folks, the Carluccio's, or, you know, the Pizza Expresses, the Azuris, the CDGs that, you know, have publicly announced these kinds of actions in the short term, it's probably the 30% that they're getting rid of.
In their own tail, yeah.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, I think the casual dining guys are going to be some of the first guys out. They've got a little bit more space. They know how to operate. They've got, you know, the ability to diversify and pick which pubs and locations are going to go. Coat's been doing the delivery, so, you know, some of these guys actually have had pretty good traction with delivery and wine with delivery. Yeah. And so I do think it's strangely the casual dining will be some of the first that'll open, and they'll do a little bit better on the front end. So hopefully they can convince the consumer to stay there long term. But I think they've helped themselves out by getting rid of a bit of the tail that was holding them back anyways.
Yeah, and is that a role potentially for someone like yourselves to play down the line in terms of helping or giving your analysis back to the trade about where you're seeing the best chimney pot sites or the best postcodes for drink supply?
Well, I do think data is extremely important. I think, you know, for us, as we were talking about on the digital side, there is such an opportunity. And again, just, you know, beyond just the consumer, the way that the consumers are shopping, you know, the digital opportunity and understanding with Google Analytics, how people come to the website, what kind of things are activating, what kind of search terms, what their postcode is, it is quite amazing. So I do think, you know, there has been this historic sort of B2B sort of this off-trade mindset applied to an on-trade environment. Let me look at the consumer segmentation the way that the off-trade looks at it, and let me apply it to the on-trade. And the way we're looking at it is, can we start extracting all of this digital information and begin, and so a couple of our other digital partners who do the sales out that have this kind of information as well. The amount of information you get on who your consumers are through the Google Analytics and other kind of digital tools like that, to then understand that consumer base and the cross promotion opportunities between that B2C and B2B, I think are much more significant than that off trade to on trade. So I think all of the information that you're talking about, which I completely agree, I think it's coming more from the digital sort of experience than it is, you know, just that off trade category development mindset, which works really well, was applied a little bit to the big casual dining. But it's a big shift in how consumers are buying and shopping at this stage.
Yeah, that potentially it needs a big shift in the mindset of the drinks trade as well, because I know that, you know, there's been a lot of technology consultants who've been banging on for many years about, you know, the need for wine, be it winemakers, be it wine suppliers, to look at analytics more. So perhaps in a way that's going to be one of the longer term benefits that's going to come out of this, is people's willingness to put digital first rather than a nice to have when we can afford it.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of even your on-trade outlets realize that this might need to be a piece of, you know, their future going forward as well. You know, a lot of people were selling off some steaks and, you know, at-home steak packs. And once you get it set up, you know, you can just continue it running. And so I do think you are going to continue to have a plethora of opportunities as a consumer to be able to, you know, have a dining experience at home or at a restaurant. And if you can find a way to bring that restaurant experience at home with a little bit of branding and, you know, sort of sponsorship and, you know, premium added from that restaurateur, I think there's a great opportunity for that.
Yeah. So closer to home, I mean, how do you see the supplier side of things in terms of the consolidation within that? Again, there's been a lot of talk of the trade about so many suppliers. You know, where do you see that shaping out over the next year?
Well, look, you know, the walls and wheels. I mean, there's been the surplus walls and wheels, and there has been a bit of I don't want to say consolidation, but I would say maybe a rationalization. Look, I think you'll see over the next few months, quite frankly, when all of this stuff is going to go on, people are going to need to make decisions. The retention scheme, the government retention scheme, I think was helpful, and everybody hopped on it early, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen. I think if you think back to the conversations we were having internally, just a few months ago, or, when this whole thing started, we thought it was a month, we thought we'd be right back. No one, I think, expected not just this length of time and then the potential weakness of the recovery as well. So, I think there are a lot of people looking strategically. You're seeing it in every industry right now. I mean, every time you flip on BBC Business, there's another. So I do think there needs to be, there's other rumor and innuendo making a couple of the trade mags, on the beer side. And I mean, the little guys that aren't commercially, maybe as financially well off as the big guys, you always assume they're at risk. But, there's a lot of big guys here. This has completely, devastated the dynamic. And the one thing the UK had is this huge off trade, but over the past decade or so has become unprofitable to so many big suppliers. Yeah. There was this focus on the on trade, right? So even the beer guys, which isn't the line, but it's about 50-50 on off by volume. But the value into the on trade is so much greater. So you shut that down, even though people could pick up the same brands in the off trade, the margin impact on the big suppliers are significant. So I think there is a lot of people questioning the model. There is no one, I think, expecting that they're just going to hold tight for 6 months until it all comes back and there's some sort of, miracle cure. And so I think things will have to happen. And I think they'll probably happen quickly. So I would agree.
And I suppose, a bit of a tough question. I mean, do you look at your own business model and think, I mean, I know nobody ever saw this kind of situation happening, but do you see a need perhaps with the on-trade suppliers to have more of a balance between on and off and online, or just a bit more of a sort of the channel balance between the different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And now we had, just based on the market dynamic going on at the end of last year, had embarked upon a couple of relationships, which we'll hopefully be talking about in the near future, that will leverage a little bit more of the digital platform. We had within our warehouse migrated a portion of the warehouse into a more bottle pick, because the difference between the B2B, it's a completely different dynamic in the operations and how it's picked. And how you set up the warehouse structure. So we actually had set up a couple of lines for a bottle pick. Strangely, we were just in the middle of migrating to that new area when this all happened, so we got caught a little bit short. But we expect to keep a portion of the warehouse really directed on the B2C, bring some other people in. We have talked to a couple of suppliers that are very strong in the on-trade, spirits guys, and they just don't expect necessarily that that's going to come back. They're doing their own digital strategy. So we have two things. One, we want to participate and engage on the front end. We want to extricate and analyze that data in benefit of the on-trade, but also if we can use our production facility, our warehouse here as a fulfillment center to support others in the trade to continue them going. That's part of our strategy as well.
And I suppose doesn't say a benefit, but I mean, the fact that this is impacting the major brand owners as well, so potentially some of the research and the thinking around what the likes of Diageo or AB InBev or Pernod Ricard, their ability for them to be able to offer more insight and to give people like yourselves that kind of faster route into the whole digital thing as well.
Yeah, well, and I think that's it. It's the direct to consumer, and that on demand, that direct to consumer, that Deliveroo, all of that. Look, that was a huge trend to begin with. The millennials were demanding it, and I think this just exacerbates it. So, if you can find a way to be able to do that, and the digital marketing as well. It's interesting when there is a big challenge and a whole academia around investing in the digital marketing space and doing it effectively and finding the right ways, et cetera, et cetera. early on in the pandemic, my God, you could have just thrown money out there and it was, returning, but now it's come back to a more normalized fashion. And as more people migrate into there, the Googles of the world and the, Facebook, Instagrams of the world make more money. So,
Yeah.
I think that is the place where you're going to see a lot of innovation in how the big spirits guys engage consumers, not just to drink, bring them to the right B2C, but to bring them into the, the right outlets as well. I think the spirits guys here, I had a bit of a challenge in the sense that I think Americans were a little bit more used to the drink at home, margarita mixes and these kinds of things, whereas there'd been a real perfect serve mindset, a real, going to the cocktail bar and getting some flamboyant cocktail that took some extensive period of time to make. And I just don't think people could be bothered necessarily to do that at home. And so I think it does provide an opportunity, though, on how to do that. I know some of the restaurateurs have, began mixing in little pouches. And I do think you're going to maybe see a little bit more of that as an opportunity that the spirits guys get behind, because I think the idea of getting all the, the different things and putting, all of the stuff into a recipe and a perfect serve that the bartender did for you at a 10 pound G&T level, people just weren't bothered for it, so they'd prefer for the wine or beer. So I do think this has provided a lot of a lot of things for the spirits guys to think about and how to invest in the future. And I do think it is sort of connecting the dots here on how to get that cocktail culture at home in the UK, which I think would be an interesting journey for them to take.
Yeah, and I guess all categories here are going to sort of like learn from each other, or at least be able to benefit from each other. Because I've seen quite a lot of big grocery FMCG brands, both in the States and the UK, sort of setting up more DTC sites. Like I think PepsiCo in America has set up Frito-Lay direct to home, and Heinz are doing, the same brands you can buy in a supermarket from direct. And I guess more of those bigger brands do that. It kind of perhaps relaxes the rules a little bit around channel management that so many people have been cautious of in the past, isn't it? This is almost like changing the rules of before for people to be able to trade in a post-COVID world, as it were.
Well, and I think a lot of the big brands, if they were going to be honest with you, particularly in the UK, the share or the profit margin on the off trade versus on and digital is dramatically different. In the States, they've gotten squeezed, and that's how they've responded. But this is a newer thing. They've been living like this for a little while. So if Diageo or the big beer boys can find a way to get some DTC around the brand that is consistent and effective, I think they'll go for it. And I do think right now in a number of their offices that are at home, there's a number of marketing plans on how to drive a little bit of that. I think Heineken came up with the Blade. It was, maybe a little bit for a pub co, but, in talking with the Heineken boys, that on the front end of this COVID, there was just, it went out of control on, people having a little bit of that pub at home experience. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for the beer guys to be able to do that.
Good. Can I ask you from a personal point of view then? I mean, I know you were saying earlier about, you've been in the office virtually all through the time of this. I mean, as a business leader, how have you found it? You kind of had many challenges or any challenge like this before. I mean, what's it been like from a personal point of view?
Well, we've been lucky enough that there hasn't been anybody here, that have gotten sick or had significant family impacted. And that was when we set out, one of our initial priorities. There was some, nervousness on the front end on, just getting the people that wanted to work here. We've got a skeleton staff, but we thought it was important to take the opportunity to migrate into the digital platform, but we certainly didn't want to drag anybody in and shove them into the office. I've tried to go out and pick with the boys on occasion. My efficiency is not quite up to their speed, but I'm pretty good on the accuracy. And so, it's been tough because there's limited interaction with folks. It is difficult for the people that are working, despite the number of team calls. I think the frustrating thing is because you can't just do business in 2 seconds, the number of emails you get from everyone now is over the top. You just can't keep up with it. Yeah. So it's more communication, but less personalization, I think. Mm-hmm. It's also tough on the culture, right? So how do you, we've sort of with the team here been reinforcing this migration from, your customer now is the person at home opening that box of wine with the nice gift message in.
Yeah.
You better be sure to have it all look pretty and in perfect shape. You know, you can't get that to everybody that's sitting at home right now that needs to sort of hear that message as well. So, you know, as we talked about, everybody here has, you know, we've done our best to keep costs down, which meant let the security guard go and let the cleaners go. So, yes, I am cleaning the bathrooms and making the coffee and locking up. But, you know, everybody pitches in. And so I think it's been a positive experience for the people that have been here and building with the tight team. But it's difficult then to build that common experience with everyone else that's out there. So, yeah, it's certainly a challenge. And now, you know, look, getting people back on, taking a few of the people off furlough. Why is he coming off furlough instead of me? Kind of dynamic. You know, it's going to be a challenge. But hey, you know, smooth waters never made a good sailor. So
yeah. I mean, do you look at other leaders to see what they're doing, and not necessarily in the drinks industry, in other sectors? I mean, are there, where do you go to get that kind of influence or knowledge, or is that just what you've got to just go by your gut instincts?
No, I've talked to other, you know, friends, colleagues, you know, people that have, and you know, the interesting thing there's I'd say better practices and, you know, people doing some good things, but there's no silver bullet out here. You know, it's not very pleasant for a lot of folks. There are some people that have gotten a benefit from this one way or the other. And a lot of the issues that we deal with, you know, I've seen other people dealing with, you know, the same situation in completely different industries. They might handle it a little differently because of the dynamic they have. So, yeah, I mean, everybody's, you know, dealing with a lot of it. You try to wonder what the long-term impact is going to be then on your trade. And I do think, you know, there's a lot of people now questioning their investment in real estate and offices. So, you know, do I need this £1 million office in the middle? We've proven that we can sort of work somewhat effectively from home. And I think there's, and I know a couple that are looking to migrate away from the big office space into a small sort of flexible workspace, and have a lot more people working from home. So I do think there will be some long-term impacts for this on certain aspects of the, you know, the business and industry and in other areas where people work to. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to say, I mean, and sort of a final thought, really. I mean, I know it's a bit of a hard one to throw at you, but I mean, if you look at this in a year's time, I mean, what do you feel? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Do you see this as a blip, or is it going to have a seismic change to how things are? Or
well, look, I think that the other big impact you have on the on-trade is you know, the economy. So there is just the on-trade is about disposable income, and if you think about the stuff that was happening before COVID, it was experiential. People, you know, social media forced people to go out, and you know, you had to be seen, you know, in the best place with the best looking people, drinking the most amazing drinks to prove to everybody that you had a better life than they did. And now suddenly, you know, so many people are going to be out of work, you know, and that discretionary income, the ability to go out, you know, I question whether, you know, that dynamic will continue to operate. So I do think the trajectory of the on-trade is going to be dramatically shifted by the economic reality when everybody starts getting their pink slips out there. I don't think it'll be like the credit crunch where everyone trades down dramatically, but I do think some of the real winners out there, the real events, you know, and those kinds of places, you know, not just from social distancing. I don't know if people are going to be confident enough to spend that much money to do the things they did before COVID until there's another upward trajectory in the economy. And I think we're on the front end of obviously the knock-on impact on, you know, everybody inevitably losing their job on the, you know, the retention scheme.
so, yeah, so for Enotria & Co, is it a case of sort of managing the kind of day-to-day, month-by-month demands, but also having that forward thought as well about where you might end up?
Yeah, and we've look, we've challenged, because one thing you can do is train people. We've challenged a lot of folks on digital training. I think that's the future. So whether it's with us or somewhere else, you know, taking someone, and quite frankly, on the premium wine side, the skill of getting in and the wine knowledge and talking to someone and convincing them, and that whole sale dynamic, is not going to be around for a little while, right? So people are worried about credit, they're worried about their inventory, they're worried, it's pricing, it's sales operations, it's credit. It's very tactical for a period of time. And so how can we use people internally and redeploy their skills in other areas? Yeah, so we've had a lot of people that have done a lot of digital training. So we've sort of put a matrix. Okay, what are you interested in? Okay, we need you to start training in this, that, and the other. And so maybe we can, when they come back on board, help out with the social media, with Google Analytics, with doing a few things. A lot of our customers are also the people that are looking to get into digital. So, you know, some B2B folks that are looking into B2C, if I can help them by, you know, framing up some Shopify sites or whatever it is quite quickly, and use my internal resources to help them do it, you know, then it's helpful for me. So we've tried to redeploy in an area that we think will grow. And, you know, if I can find a way to migrate some people off the retention scheme into supporting those kinds of endeavors, then I think it's pretty helpful for everyone. And if the people, you know, it just doesn't work out, you know, we've got some people and trained them up in an area of skill that I think is going to be extremely important in the future.
Great, brilliant. Well, I mean, as you say, it sounds like a very different drink supplier to what you would have been sort of 2-3 years ago, and, you know, much more about drinks and digital supply perhaps in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Troy, for your time. It's been really, really great talking to you, and all the best to you and your team, and hopefully you can get as many of them back off furlough in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Richard.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.